Hello and welcome, coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's jump straight into your headlines before we delve into your top stories for today. Now, the Competition Commission announces a substantial reduction in the price of COVID-19 PCR tests. South Africa records 17,154 new coronavirus infections in the latest 24-hour period. And government has held a memorial service of former Deputy President FW de Klerk in Cape Town. Well, those will look at your headlines for today. Let's get into your top story. President Cyril Ramaphosa says that despite his personal doubts about the Constitution of South Africa, the last apartheid-era president, FW de Klerk, was prepared to acknowledge that it would guarantee the freedom of all the people in the country. Ramaphosa is delivering the eulogy at the State Memorial Service for de Klerk at the Grote Kerk in Cape Town. Ramaphosa says de Klerk was brave enough to fight for better rights for the oppressed.
He acknowledged both his fears about change and the extent to which the new democratic constitution answered those fears. Even as he entered into negotiations, he was fearful of a number of things. Much as he spoke about universal suffrage or majority rule, it did instill a fear in him. Even as he spoke about equal rights for all, he and his party wanted minority rights, cultural rights, and the language of Afrikaans to be protected. Even as he expressed his doubts about some parts of the Constitution, he was prepared to acknowledge that it provided a foundation for a South Africa in which the rights and the freedoms of all its people would be guaranteed. The constitution-making process, our first democratic elections, the sitting of the first truly representative parliament, and the systematic dismantling of decades of racist and discriminatory laws were milestones on a difficult journey that was many years in the making. The freedom that we know today would not have been possible had it not been for the contribution of many people. Black people, white people, Indian people, colored men and women, Democrats in our country, socialists, communists, Africanists, and Afrikaner nationalists, comrades and adversaries. All of these people and the various strands played an important role in getting us where we are today. It would not have been possible without those who paid the ultimate price in the fight for freedom, those who were tortured and murdered, those who were imprisoned and exiled.
Well, for more on this, Professor Barry Hanyani from the Northwest University joins us to reflect on the life and times of FW de Klerk. This as we also head into Reconciliation Day come the 16th of December in South Africa. Prof, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us once again on the week ahead.
Yes, Ella, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to your viewers.
Prof, you know, some mixed reactions coming through since the passing of FW de Klerk. I mean, although he made significant contributions to end the nation's minority right rule, Mr. de Klerk also drew lifelong criticisms as the last apartheid leader. What's your sentiments on his legacy, the mixed legacy he holds to date?
Well, it would obviously echo the kind of diverse interpretations and inputs that you find from the diverse voices and ideological stance that you find not only in our polity, but also in our political discourse as well. He may be associated with atrocities that were dubbed as black-on-black violence, that perhaps if he was not orchestrating them, he may have had a knowledge of it and could have responded to that scourge in a much more different way. But at the same time, he needed to rise to the occasion, confront his own particular political demons, and reconcile his own kind of political beliefs, which in a sense would have to be shaped by political developments of the day. But perhaps prior to that, one needs to locate his political upbringing within the Afrikaner nationalistic kind of thinking and way of doing things. And by then insisting on breaking ranks after being Minister of Education and basically building a path towards a more moderate, a more reconciliatory kind of political engagement. So in essence, it's a bag of mixed reactions, of mixed beliefs, of mixed manifestations of a kind that I think it will take a bit of time for all of us to actually come to some kind of divisive conclusion.
Yeah, Prof, you speak of breaking ranks. As we know, Mr. de Klerk played an important role, as we heard in South Africa's history, recognizing the moment for change and then acting on that, demonstrating the will to act. Again, for others, he was the man who turned his back on his people to embrace, the liberation movements and was also perhaps deemed a sellout by some of the nation. How do you think that's also come to be part of his legacy?
That would be a bit harsh, right?
Okay.
And I'm suggesting a bit harsh given the fact that surely prior to getting the validation of a kind to release political prisoners, to unban political organizations, some kind of a referendum would be needed, and he pursued that path. A referendum that allowed him to, once and for all and out of an open space, allow his own people to say, do they accept that the path to negotiations is the only path that can save this country? The path to negotiations is the only path that can free his own people as well from shackles of fear, from shackles of isolation, from shackles of alienation, from shackles of hate, and all other kinds of manifestations, which, by the way, would in the end imprison your white nationalists in this country. And so I would not necessarily align with the thinking that he might have betrayed his own people. Surely he has reached out. He was bold enough to reach out. And we should not sacrifice his legacy, given the fact that it was him who took the bold step to do such an initiative.
Thank you for those sentiments, Prof. When we look, posthumously, I mean, Mr. de Klerk also sought to address these criticisms in a video message that was released on the day of his passing, where he literally came out to say sorry for his role in apartheid. I wonder, to date, how do you think that video, that apology was received? Did it land well for South Africans overall?
The timing was something else.
Yeah.
Was this a death wish of a kind, a death message in a way? And was it a reflection of his own personal regrets? Could it have been done much earlier? Could it have replaced, for instance, that public spat he had with a number of political parties? Reflecting on the nature and perhaps the significance of apartheid. He had his own views. And perhaps at that stage, you could have taken a much more moderate position, one that also brings into play his own personal conviction towards the past, but an interpretation that once again would seek to promote reconciliation rather than further add some kind of controversy. You could have done much better there. And so a lot of people would step back and say, rightly so, these were the words of a dying man, but a dying man who was once a statesman, who perhaps could have taken a step further to say, I'm sorry for the following atrocities that may have committed in the name of government, and I have, or I might have played a part, and this could be that part, so that in the end there is less ambiguity in terms of his own role. It might not be a role that is decisive, but the extent to which he may have been aware of certain transactions could have added value in terms of the healing part of the nation. So it is such voices, I'm afraid, that might want to crucify his legacy. But going forward from a human perspective, one would rise to the occasion and take the position taken by the current incumbent, President Ramaphosa, and reflect on the human spirit and not necessarily on the mistakes, politically and otherwise, that may have been committed.
Well, speaking about, ambiguity and perhaps atrocities committed in the name of government, what are your thoughts about, Mr. de Klerk trying to avoid responsibility for the enormity of abuses of apartheid, particularly during his testimony at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Also, when he was, State Security Council head, obviously overseeing the deaths, the abductions, the arrests, perhaps even torture of South Africans, including, as we know, the Craddock Four, Ribeiro couple, amongst many others. I wonder how you weigh in on that regarding his legacy.
I think the apartheid regime towards its last days was extremely fragmented. It was franchised in a way. You would have operatives who went rogue, and some of them would perhaps respond and report to a single unit rather than a multitude of units that constituted at that stage state security. It's one issue that I think we haven't paid particular attention on. If you go back to the testimonies given by people like Mamasela and others who operated from the Flat Plus unit, you would begin to paint a picture of some kind of rogueness, some kind of, perhaps by extension, mutiny of a kind, where those who had the power and the ability to take certain decisions would do so with impunity. But then there were moderates somewhere who were looking forward to Kempton Park, despite the failure of CODESA 1 and 2, leading to multi-party talks. These are persons who were not kept in the loop. And I think that kind of interpretation and reality is there. Whether it was abused or not requires some kind of analysis. It could be that it was abused as well, that some people knew about black-on-black violence in a number of places, in KZN, in Gauteng, in the Vaal, and who were basically operating. Were these government agents? Likelihood, yes. Were they foreign-sponsored? We need to ask such questions. I think this conversation will continue for quite some time. And of course, albeit in a spirit of wanting to establish truth to power.
Well, speaking of which, South Africa commemorates Reconciliation Day, which was obviously created to mark the end of apartheid, which will be celebrated this coming Wednesday, the 16th of December. I wonder, how significant is this day in the South Africa that we live in, which is marked by many socioeconomic disparities inherited by the majority of South Africans due to apartheid and colonialism?
I think it represents missed opportunities, and so many of them. We've allowed government to take control. which I suspect this is something that belongs to the people. The people should have set the agenda in celebrating this occasion and allow government to provide resources without getting directly involved, seeing that it's more of a civic matter rather than a necessarily government-driven matter. So I find that to be a little bit disappointing in that it did not create space for the public to decide for themselves how best to reconcile, how best to reach each other. Is it through sport? And if it is through sport, how do we celebrate the victories that we have seen? If you take the example of the Springboks, they've represented us well at least in the last couple of years. Your Blitzbokke as well. Soccer has done wonderful in terms of manufacturing that much needed social cohesion. Once again, I don't see social cohesion as a bureaucratic product. It must be driven by social means, by social transactions. And I think we've missed so many opportunities to arrive at that kind of position.
And Prof, just perhaps before we get an update on local government elections, I wonder, there were some divided opinions on whether, President FW de Klerk deserved a state funeral. Government obviously coming through and giving him a state memorial at large. Do you think this was perhaps to maintain peace in the country? What do you think, solidified this final decision as well?
Well, we needed to walk that path of reconciliation as part of your line of questioning and, of course, forming part of this conversation today. Reconciliation cannot be in black and white alone. It's something that is lived. It is something that begins to define a particular worldview. And rightly so, we should live up to that. I think it was an honor and something honorable in any case, demonstrating to ourselves and perhaps the rest of the world that what we fashioned for ourselves as reconciliation, as part of building a rainbow nation, requires sacrifices, requires a new paradigm in terms of thinking. What is it to reach out to humanity? What is it to redefine humanity for ourselves? So all of these imperatives, I suspect, may have been influential in arriving at such a decision.
Well, Prof, just before we let you go, obviously looking at the local government elections updates, what's been happening with the Hung municipalities, I wonder if you can give us some thoughts on the 66 Hung municipalities. I mean, are they functioning? Are they functioning well at this point? And in terms of the municipal councils, have they come into operation? I wonder, in terms of that induction process, has that also gotten underway?
Yeah, look, I think overall the excitement has died down for obvious reasons, and I think we needed to observe that. Hung municipalities negotiations continued fairly well. Those who managed to play the political game have bargained something for themselves, whether it's positions within councils or whether it's some kind of benefits or bargaining that was put forth, that was observed well and done. Going forward, some councils have gone as far as inaugurating councillors. Others have taken a step further to say they're not going to wait for the new year. They're going to proceed with the induction process. So we separate the two processes quite well, which are in themselves administrative in nature. The inauguration, everyone else taking the oath. But beyond that, allowing all the new councillors in particular to be exposed to the workings of the councils. So a majority of them have taken that step forward, which is quite good. So going into 2022, one would anticipate that things will be working well, especially at a time when a lot of budgets, your IDPs as well, for this current financial year have been long approved. And so it's time to implement. So we will be keeping an eye on whether indeed promises made in terms of quality service delivery, in terms of promoting good governance, is something to behold. I'm happy that the current language speaks around the issue of lifestyle audits. I was listening to the interview by the former executive mayor, Ekurhuleni, Mr. Masina. Suddenly, it has become important to deal with issues of merit, of issues of consistency and continuity. So these, for me, will remain important going forward to 2022.
Prof, it's always a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for your time again. Professor Barry Yani from the Northwest University, joining us to reflect on the life and times of FW de Klerk. This, of course, as the country heads into Reconciliation Day on the 16th of December, and also giving us an update on local government elections. Obviously, trying to understand the promises that have been made with regards to service delivery and good governance, whether this will be followed through on, perhaps also seeing how coalition governments at large will be operating come 2022. Again, thank you for his time. Let's take a quick ad break. All right, welcome back. You are tuned into The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. In other news today, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases says that 17,154 new coronavirus infections were identified in the country. This in the latest 24-hour recording period. The increases represent a 16.4% positivity rate. Now, the Health Department says 36 more people have succumbed to the COVID-19 related complications. The death toll now stands at 90,116. Meanwhile, the Competition Commission also says with effect from today, consumers will not pay more than 500 Rand for COVID-19 PCR tests. The figure includes VAT, and the Commission's statement comes after it reached an agreement with two major laboratories, Ampath and Lancet. The Competition Commissioner, Deminkosi Bonakele, has urged other laboratories to also lower their prices of the tests in line with this agreement. Bonakele says consumers must report laboratories that are still charging consumers more than 500 Rand for the tests. Well, he says the investigation revealed that the laboratories had released a significant decline in the cost of conducting the tests, but the prices for consumers had remained high.
This morning, on 12 December 2021, the Competition Tribunal, upon application by the parties, has confirmed the groundbreaking agreement between the Competition Commission and each of the two largest private pathology laboratories in South Africa, namely Ampath and Lancet. The agreement settled a dispute on pricing of COVID-19 PCR tests. In terms of the agreement, Ampath and Lancet have agreed to reduce the price of COVID-19 PCR tests from about 850 or whichever prevailing price to no more than 500 rands, including VAT per test with immediate effect. This follows an investigation by the Commission, which was triggered by a complaint lodged by the Council of Medical Schemes in October 2021, alleging that the price for supplying PCR tests for COVID-19 is unfairly inflated, exorbitant, and or unjustifiable in contravention of Section 81A of the Competition Act. The investigation focused on three largest private pathology laboratories as respondents, namely Ampath, Lancet, and Pathcare. And these are all partnerships of pathologists. In the May, it was observed that private pathology laboratories have experienced substantial cost reductions in conducting COVID-19 PCR tests and were processing significant volumes, especially during infection waves. Yet the price charged by private pathology laboratories for tests remain persistently high and unchanged at 850, even though in recent months there have been some negligible downward price adjustments. Nonetheless, the price for tests remained excessively high. The Commission's investigation revealed that the costs for private laboratory firms have in fact reduced on average, thereby increasing their absolute margins. The Commission's investigation also revealed that the pathology groups have been earning significant profits since March 2020, especially in the current financial year to date. The Commission's view is that the failure to reduce prices in the context of material reduction in costs is the flip side of the consumer protection regulations, as it results in the same effect, namely an increase in margin earned for essential product or service. In this way, firms are still able to exploit consumers by earning excessive profits on essential products or services.
Right. Now, Mia Malan, Becky Sisa, Editor-in-Chief, joins us for an update on this announcement and more. Mia, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us here once again.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Mia, I think just on the back of what Teminkosi Bonakela had echoed, I mean, this is a groundbreaking agreement announced by the Competition Commission. I mean, for those, who want to understand it, could you contextualize what this ruling ultimately means? I mean, why did the price of tests ultimately go down?
So ultimately, as the Commissioner said, it went down because the Council for Medical Schemes lodged a formal complaint saying that because there's been many tests that's been conducting by the private sector and therefore the cost of processing those tests should have gone down, that cost reduction was not transferred to consumers. And it is sad if you think that it wasn't spontaneously transferred. There had to be a complaint and then there had to be a ruling to tell them to bring down those prices. And it is, of course, very much more affordable now. Many people would argue that 500 rands a test is still too high, but especially because we have the fourth wave now and far more people will now require tests. And also those who can still travel to countries that hasn't imposed travel bans on South Africa need to have those tests. They have no choice. You have to have a PCR test. And that will obviously help then with reducing the costs of those arrangements.
Which brings me to my next point. Obviously, when you look at the costs incurred and perhaps the makeup of it to reach the price of 850, which has now been reduced to 500, I mean, what is it going to mean for consumers at large? Is this new price still too high? Is it low enough, in fact, for consumers going forward?
Well, many consumers I've seen since that announcement complain on social media that it's still too high for them. But we have to take into consideration at the beginning of the pandemic, the cost of those tests were higher than 850 rands. It was 1,400 rands, the Commissioner said today. So in effect, it's now almost like a third of what it was. But the Commissioner also said that they have requested labs to submit their financial statements every 3 months of their costs. So every 3 months, those statements will be reviewed, and if the costs have still significantly further been reduced, then they will request that the price goes down further.
And then, Mia, I mean, we heard that it's going to involve Ampath, Lancet and Pathcare. I mean, will it then also apply to all other lab tests? And also, will they have to pay a fine or reimburse people? I mean, what are the repercussions on the back of this announcement by the Competition Commission?
So the repercussions were not really discussed today, but what was said was that just because the announcement entails Lancet and Ampath doesn't mean that other smaller laboratories should not charge 500 rands. And there's been a request to ask consumers that if any private laboratory charges you from today more than 500 rands for a test, that they should be reported at the Competition Commission. So the idea is not just for Lancet and Ampath to reduce their prices, it's for everyone, for every single laboratory in the country to reduce it to 500 rands.
I mean, me on the back of this, as the country enters the fourth wave, perhaps provinces like the Western Cape already declaring that they're in the fourth wave. I mean, the numbers are high, over 17,000, I think 17,154 in the latest 24-hour cycle. What's emerging in terms of hotspots around the country with regards to COVID-19?
So if we look at Gauteng, there are early indications that we're reaching a peak. We, of course, can't say that yet because you need quite a few days, a sustained period to indicate that. But if you were going to plot these past days on a graph, you will see the peak going down. But that does not mean it has necessarily gone down. You need a sustained period, as I said. But if we look at, for instance, hospital admissions, where are those increasing now? Then we do see significant increases in Limpopo, Mpumalanga and and Northwest. And we know that hospital admissions follow, an increase in cases normally, or when cases move to other provinces. So those provinces are, analysts are on the lookout for them. And we are going to see this moving all over the country now. We already know that Omicron has been detected in every single province, but we're going to see it move away from Gauteng more and spread faster in other provinces. If we look at yesterday's figures, Gauteng is now about 50% of new cases. And if you compare this to a week or so ago, that was between 70 and 80%. So that's an indication that it is spreading now to other provinces.
And Mia, speaking of hospitalizations and also the positivity rate, when we look at the trends emerging in terms of the groups that seem to be the most vulnerable, amongst people, what's also emerging according to the data?
So what we're seeing with data now, initially when we look at hospitalization data, it was mostly younger people who were infected, so 10 to 39, but also there were quite a bit of concerns because of children between 0 and 5. Who were admitted to hospital. But now that is starting to change. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases on Friday presented data that shows that the proportion of cases that's constituted of children between 0 and 5 years are now decreasing, and the proportion of cases of older people, of those of 60 and older, are increasing. So those proportions are changing, where it's starting to look like it's no longer young people who are affected the most. It is starting to decrease and to change and to move into older people being hospitalized. We know older people, even if they've been vaccinated, that they're more vulnerable because older people have weaker immune systems and that sort of thing. So we're starting to see more of a profile that's similar now emerging to other waves, and no longer just the very young children increasing at a faster rate than older people.
Well, Mia, let's wrap up this conversation by also, as you mentioned, Omicron has been found in every province in the country, and as the NCCC is set to meet with the president to perhaps assess the situation and understand where to from here. Is a harder lockdown imminent in your opinion?
Well, I really don't know what they're going to do, but what I can say is that I do know that not just for scientists, but also for the health department, large gatherings over the festive season is a big concern, because those can so easily turn into super spreader events. Yeah. So if you look at the festive period, there would likely be a lot of church gatherings because of Christmas and over that period. So something that they may look at and consider is to perhaps reduce the numbers of people who can gather at large indoor gatherings. And then if hospitalizations increase, we see it increasing at a slower rate than in previous waves, but we don't yet know what will happen as the wave goes on. And if those hospitalizations become a lot and they are making it hard to cope in their health system, then we normally see alcohol sales restrictions to open up beds. So those are perhaps the two things that you can be on the lookout for, but I don't know what they're going to do.
All right. Thank you so much, Mia, for your time. It's always a pleasure having you join us. Again, Mia Malani-Speki Sisa's editor-in-chief, chatting about the latest coming through. Obviously, the price of PCR tests, COVID-19 tests in South Africa's private sector will be going down from 850 Rand to 500 Rand. And she was also just in conversation about the current situation regarding the recorded cases in the country, sitting at over 17,000. Again, exploring some of the possible measures needed to be put in place. Again, thank you, Mia, for your time. Let's take a quick ad break. More on the other side. You are tuned into the week ahead. Let's continue with more news further afield now. On to East Africa and Kenya, celebrating its 58th Independence Day anniversary today. Again, the commemoration serves as an opportunity for Kenyans to reflect on their storied history and their rich heritage culture. Well, for more on this, we're joined by correspondent Sarah Kimani. Sarah, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on the week ahead.
Thank you for having me. A very good afternoon from Nairobi, where celebrations are being held at Uhuru Gardens.
Well, Sarah, let's look at these celebrations. I mean, we understand it's a big day for the people of Kenya. I mean, first, we've got the commemoration of the East African Nations Declaration of Freedom, which happened back in 1963, but also a year later, it honors Kenya's official establishment as a Jamhuri Republic. Walk us through the latest on how these celebrations are currently going there.
Well, President Kenyatta has just concluded his speech. Now today's ceremony was colorful and more elaborate in terms of what the military was able to do, because this is President Kenyatta's last Jamhuri Day celebrations as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. So previously the celebrations would take a shorter time. The President would be dressed in his civilian wear, but today he came into the stadium dressed in military wear. He inspected the Guard of Honor. The Guard of Honor then had this colorful, elaborate ceremony, and the grounds where the ceremony was being held are grounds that were used as a concentration camp for some of the freedom fighters. Now it has been renovated and redone in order to serve as an area where Kenyans will be able to come in and see the history of the country in terms of the fight for independence. It is called Uhuru Gardens. Uhuru is Swahili for freedom. And so today was the first time since 1963 that this ceremony was actually being held here again. So 2 times now that the Jamhuri celebrations have been held in these grounds.
Well, Sarah, speaking of which, I wonder, besides ordinary citizens, I mean, which heads of states are also part of the event today?
Well, previously we have had foreign heads of state attend these ceremonies, but today was only for Kenyans, and we did not have any foreign dignitaries attending, apart from high commissioners and ambassadors who are accredited to the country. In terms of political leaders, we had Deputy President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga as the only other people who have addressed the gathering. Nowadays, because of COVID-19 protocols, the ceremonies are shorter and speeches are also shorter, and they're done very quickly to avoid people being in crowds at the same time and for a long period of time.
There are some who are of the view that, or assert rather, that such an opening in Africa and in Kenya in particular was very Eurocentric. Now, to just go back to your first point about it being President Kenyatta's last speech, what did he touch on during his speech? How was it also received by those in attendance?
Well, Kenyatta's speech sounded more reconciliatory. He took the country through what we have been through as a country in terms of the fight for freedom, spoke about some of the forefathers of the country, the founding fathers of the country, the role they played in the fight for freedom, what they had to go through for the country to be where it is now. That was the first liberation. He spoke about the second liberation, that is the fight for multipartyism, and here he spoke about Raila Odinga, his father Jaramogi Odinga, and others, including Professor Wangari Maathai, who fought for multipartyism, and he praised them for that. And then he spoke about now the current leadership and what they have been able to do. But he was also very clear on the reason why he crafted a political truce with Raila Odinga at a time when everybody thought the country should move forward from elections. He was also clear that even though Kenyans have put 58 years of colonialism behind, the past years of colonialism behind them, they must not forget what the country went through and what the forefathers went through, so that they can be able to craft a future that he said should be a future of reconciliation and peace building. He steered clear of the current politics. He doesn't get along very well with his deputy, so he steered clear of that. But he invited Odinga to address the gathering, and Odinga also steered clear of politics, but instead concentrated on the history of the country this far.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for that. I wonder, just in parting, when we look at some of the challenges that continue to face Kenya over the 58 years, I know you said that the president did steer away from socio and economic as well as political issues, but I wonder if you can contextualize that for us. What are some of the challenges that Kenyans continue to face 58 years into independence?
Well, the country, majority of the people are still poor, living, as the World Bank always puts it, below $1. So issues, when Kenya got independence, Uhuru Kenyatta's father was the first president, and he spoke about three things that we needed to fight as a country. He spoke about ignorance, poverty, and illiteracy. Now, in terms of ignorance, I think Kenyans are more aware of the kind of leadership they want, and that's why you find elections here are very competitive. In terms of poverty, we still have not made as much land strides as the country would want, even though Kenya is East Africa's biggest economy. A majority of the country is still poor. People still cannot afford the 3 square meals. As we speak now, parts of the country are going through a drought. And in terms of illiteracy, well, Kenya has made serious strides. We are among the most educated population on the continent. You will find Kenyans working in almost all spheres of global economy. So in terms of that, they have done much. Much has been done by successive regimes, but probably more could be done. Now with our COVID-19, we are finding that some of those gains that have been made over the last 58 years are being drawn back. And that is why one of the things that Kenyatta said was there is need for Kenyans to come out and get vaccinated in large numbers so that the economy can reopen fully. But remember, Kenya has also said that if you will not have been vaccinated by the 21st of December, then you will not be able to receive a government facility, to access government facilities and also to access government services.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, in Kenya today, celebrations abound as it celebrates 58 years of independence. Again, the commemoration serves as an opportunity for Kenyans to reflect on their stored history and a rich cultural heritage. Again, Sarah Kimani joining us, our correspondent in East Africa, updating us on the latest coming there. Obviously, just having concluded for this speech by more news now. South Africa's beauty queen Shudufatso Masida, who has been crowned Miss South Africa 2020, will be representing the country at Miss World 2021. Now, the pageant takes place on Thursday in San Juan in Puerto Rico. She's up against 109 contestants, all from other countries. Of course, the Masida family at the Masia Havangani outside Tuyando are excited about her journey. Our senior video journalist Tolisani Livebe reports.
The sky is no limit for the 25-year-old 2020 Miss South Africa title holder, Shudufatso Masida. From a magazine clothing model to a #1 country beauty queen, Masida has never looked back since her 2020 beauty crown. Her family says their wish for Shudu, as she is affectionately known, is to bring the Miss World 2021 crown home.
The whole of South Africa will be very much proud for having been represented in the world contest, and we and even the province Limpopo will also feel proud that she has represented the province. And we as a family, we are sending our prayers to God, to make her succeed in this contest.
Shudu brother is confident that Masida will bring the world crown home.
I knew she loved beauty from the start. She was always consistent about becoming a beauty queen ever since she was 16, being on magazines, and even when we were young, dressing up, looking in the mirror. And I feel proud of her because of what she's doing and what she's standing for and what she's consistently standing for, no matter how some people can bully her or something on social media. But the way she's resistant to everything, it shows that she knows what she's standing for, and she's standing for the mental health and for the powerhouse. I believe she will come back with the crown and she'll make us proud as the family.
And a heartfelt appeal to young girls hoping to emulate Shudufatso.
The advice that I can give to young girls is that they must have visions. They have to focus on whatever they need in life, because nothing comes easy. You have to struggle, you have to push to get what you want in life.
After being crowned Miss South Africa last year, Shudu talked about what is close to her heart.
On our street, there was a child-headed family just next door. From there, I had the dream to build a haven with white walls and a blue roof where women and children could come in and be equipped, not only receive humanitarian aid, but be equipped with the necessary skills to be agents of their own future.
Shudu has spent the last 3 weeks with other contestants in Puerto Rico engaging in various activities in preparation for the Miss World competition. Ulisani Lubebe, SABC News, Habangani, at Masia Village in Limpopo.
Wishing her all the best of luck for the coming week. In other news now, former Social Development Minister Batabile Dlamini will find out this coming week if she's been acquitted of perjury charges. The Johannesburg Magistrates Court has postponed her trial to the 17th of December, where Dlamini is accused of lying under oath whilst giving evidence at a constitutional court inquiry into the 2017 social grants crisis. She's pleaded not guilty to the charges. Abongile Dumako reports.
Following extensive arguments from both the state and the defense team, Batabile Dlamini is yet to know whether or not she'll be acquitted in accordance to the application she put in front of this court. Let's listen in to some of the arguments put forward by both the state and the defense.
Paragraph 6 basically deals with issues that are in dispute, which basically needs to be addressed in the set of argument. The first issue being whether the accused gave false evidence whilst under oath and or during testimony at the said inquiry.
Who lied to who? It was not the understanding that they were not reporting directly to her, but to Mvulane is shared by other people. And it was raised in the inquiry and it was not contested.
Throughout the day, she has been listening to the arguments. Magistrate Betty Kumalo is expected to deliver a judgment next week. This is what she had to say.
I am of the view that both parties have raised extensive issues regarding this application that I believe it warrants this court taking an appropriate opportunity to go through all these issues and then make an overall finding as to whether the application is to be granted or should be dismissed.
Support base for Batabile Dlamini continued to be witnessed inside and outside of this magistrate's court. This as she continues to await for the 17th of December, where she will know whether or not she's been acquitted. Abongile Dumako, SABC News, Johannesburg.
It seems time is running out for Parliament to amend the Electoral Act before the next general elections in 2024. The Act was declared unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court in June of 2020 because it requires adult citizens now to be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures only through their membership of political parties. While the Apex Court ordered Parliament to correct the defect within 24 months.
It is declared that the Electoral Act 73 of 1998 is unconstitutional to the extent that it requires that adult citizens may be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures only through their membership of political parties.
One SA movement says it hopes Parliament will not miss the Constitutional Court deadline.
As the Parliament responded to us is that they can't yet be in contempt of court given that they've still got June till June next year. Our response to them has been straightforward that we know practically how long it takes to pass a bill. You do not have the time. Publish then the current draft submission we have made.
Parliament says it takes the Constitutional Court deadline seriously, but should be allowed to do its work.
Parliament needs to be given time, it needs to be given an opportunity and space to conduct its business. Particularly Mr. Maimane, he is a former parliamentarian, he knows how things are done. So that kind of anxiety or apprehension is really without foundation because Parliament and the committee in particular on Home Affairs working very hard to ensure that we comply with the judgment of the court.
Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi briefed the Home Affairs Portfolio Committee this week on some of the developments around electoral amendments.
Now, the minimalist option which I've spoken about, which we said is the one on which the bill is based, The minimalist option entails modifying the existing multi-member electoral system to accommodate independent candidates in the national and provincial elections without many changes in the legislation, including and not interfering with the constitutionality required general proportionality.
Parliament has over 6 months left to amend the Act to give effect to the Constitutional Court ruling. Mercedes Besant, SABC News, Parliament.
And that's where we leave it for you today. It's all we have on the week ahead. Do have a good, safe week ahead. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the team until next week. It is goodbye for now.